The wedding invitation lay on Damon Reed's mahogany desk like a beautiful lie, its gold embossing catching the harsh afternoon light that filtered through the floor-to-ceiling windows of his Manhattan office. Mr. and Mrs. Richard Ashford request the pleasure of your company at the marriage of their daughter Victoria Elizabeth to Mr. Damon James Reed, this Saturday, 72 hours, the countdown to a life he'd carefully constructed but never truly chosen. Damon's fingers traced the elegant script of his own name, feeling like a stranger reading about someone else's future. At 32, he'd built an empire from abandoned lots and broken dreams, transforming forgotten corners of the city into gleaming testaments to second chances. Yet here he sat, unable to renovate the growing emptiness in his own chest. The jackhammer's relentless percussion from the construction site below seemed to echo the hammering of his heart, a rhythm of dread disguised as wedding bells. "Mr. Reed?" Sarah's voice drifted through the intercom, soft as silk, yet sharp enough to cut through his spiraling thoughts. "The interior designer is here for your 2 o'clock. Right. The penthouse. Victoria's latest project. Their future home that felt more like a mausoleum waiting to happen. She'd left for Los Angeles 3 days ago, trusting him to finalize the details of their domestic stage set. Another performance in the elaborate theater their relationship had become. "Send her in." Damon straightened his charcoal suit jacket and attempted to summon the polished facade that had carried him through countless boardroom conquests. He expected another of Victoria's society contacts, someone who would nod approvingly at everything, charge an astronomical fee, and deliver something beautiful but soulless. The door whispered open. Time stopped. She moved into his office like liquid sunlight given form, and Damon felt the careful architecture of his composure begin to crumble. Platinum blonde hair fell in soft waves past her shoulders, catching the light like spun gold. Her eyes were the color of spring rain, gray-green and luminous, framed by dark lashes that made him forget how to breathe. She wore a cream silk blouse tucked into high-waisted charcoal pants, every line of her figure a study in elegant curves and confident grace. But it wasn't her breathtaking beauty that stopped his world. It was the way she inhabited space. Like she belonged everywhere and nowhere, carrying herself with the quiet strength of someone who'd learned to trust only herself. "Mr. Reed." Her voice was honey and smoke, with just the faintest trace of an accent that spoke of summers in Italy and winters in Paris. "I'm Sophia Laurent. Thank you for seeing me on such short notice." When she extended her hand, Damon stood on unsteady legs, feeling like a schoolboy approaching his first crush. The moment their skin touched, electricity coursed through his veins with an intensity that made him question everything he thought he knew about attraction, about chemistry, about the very foundations of desire. Her eyes widened, a barely perceptible flutter of surprise that told him she felt it too. This impossible, inexplicable collision of souls that had no business happening 3 days before his wedding. "The pleasure is entirely mine," he managed, his voice rougher than intended. Their hands lingered, neither willing to break the connection that felt more real than anything he'd experienced in years. Sophia withdrew first, a soft pink blush painting her cheeks as she settled into the leather chair across from his desk. Even her movements were poetry, fluid, purposeful, utterly captivating. "I have to be honest, Mr. Reed," she said, opening an elegant portfolio with fingers that trembled almost imperceptibly. "When your fiancé's assistant called yesterday, I almost declined. 72 hours to design and execute an entire penthouse renovation is..." She paused, and he watched her choose her words like an artist selecting colors. Impossible would be the diplomatic term. The mention of Victoria hit him like ice water, a reminder of the web of obligation and expectation that bound him. Yet even as guilt clawed at his chest, he couldn't tear his gaze away from Sophia's face. "Then why did you accept?" he asked, genuinely curious about this woman who radiated both vulnerability and steel. "Because..." Sophia met his eyes directly, and he saw depths there that spoke of dreams deferred and battles fought in silence. Sometimes we say yes to the impossible because the possible has been disappointing us for too long. The honesty in her voice hit him like a physical blow. How long had it been since someone had spoken to him without agenda, without the careful calculation that characterized every interaction in his world? "What do you see when you look at this space?" he asked, standing and moving toward the windows, desperate to put distance between them before he did something irreversibly stupid. Sophia rose as well, and he caught the whisper of her perfume, something subtle and intoxicating that made him think of midnight gardens and forbidden promises. "May I?" She gestured toward the floor-to-ceiling windows. "Of course." She moved to stand beside him, close enough that he could feel the warmth radiating from her skin. For a moment, they stood in silence, looking out at the city sprawling below them like a jeweled carpet. "I see potential suffocating under perfection," she said softly. "Beautiful bones imprisoned by the need to impress rather than inspire." She turned to face him, and the intensity in her gray-green eyes made his breath catch. "This penthouse isn't a home, Mr. Reed. It's a showcase, a stage set waiting for actors to bring it to life. And if you were directing this play?" The question escaped before he could stop it, loaded with meaning neither of them was ready to acknowledge. "I'd burn the script and start over." Her voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'd fill it with colors that made people feel instead of things that made them think. Textures that invited touch, spaces that encouraged whispered secrets and shared dreams. I'd make it a place where people could fall in love, really, truly fall in love, instead of just going through the motions." The silence that followed was charged with electricity, with possibility, with the dangerous recognition of two souls calling to each other across an impossible divide. "Sophia," he said, her name feeling like prayer on his lips. "Yes? I'm getting married on Saturday." The words hung between them like a blade, severing whatever spell had been weaving itself around them. Sophia stepped back, the professional mask sliding back into place, but not before he saw the flash of pain in her eyes. "Of course. I'm sorry, I got carried away. It's an occupational hazard. I tend to see the emotional possibilities in spaces rather than just the aesthetic ones." She cleared her throat, shuffling through her papers with hands that shook slightly. "Perhaps you could tell me what your fiancé has in mind for the design direction?" But Damon couldn't let it go. Couldn't pretend that the last 10 minutes hadn't changed something fundamental in the landscape of his carefully ordered world. "What if I told you the timeline wasn't really the problem?" he heard himself saying. "What if you could take the time to do this right?" "I don't understand." "Victoria won't be back until Friday evening. That gives us—" He stopped, the word us carrying more weight than it should. "That gives you time to create something real instead of something rushed." Sophia studied his face with those luminous eyes, and he had the terrifying sensation that she was reading his soul like an open book. "Why would you want my opinion when you're about to marry someone else? Shouldn't she be the one making these decisions with you?" The question hung in the air like an accusation, and Damon felt the walls he'd built around his heart beginning to crack. "Because," he said, the honesty scraping his throat raw, "I just realized I've been living in a showcase instead of a home for so long that I'd forgotten the difference. And in the span of 15 minutes, you've shown me possibilities I didn't even know existed. Mr. Reed, Damon, please, Damon." His name on her lips was music he wanted to hear forever. "I think we're walking into dangerous territory here." "I know." He stepped closer, drawn by forces beyond his control. "But for the first time in months, maybe years, I feel like I'm walking towards something instead of away from it." Sophia's breath caught, and he watched her pulse flutter at the base of her throat like a trapped butterfly. "I should go," she whispered, but she didn't move. "You should," he agreed, but neither did he. They stood there in the dying afternoon light, teetering on the edge of something that could destroy everything he'd built, everything he'd planned, everything he'd promised. And for the first time since he'd slipped an engagement ring on Victoria's finger, Damon found himself hoping someone would push him over. One condition, Sophia said finally, her voice barely audible. Anything. When this is over, when the penthouse is finished and you're married and living your perfectly designed life, we pretend this conversation never happened. The pain in her voice nearly undid him. Sophia, promise me. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. Promise me you'll forget whatever this is between us and be happy with your choice. Damon wanted to promise, wanted to lie to her and to himself, and pretend that forgetting her would be possible. Instead, he reached out and touched her face, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped despite her best efforts. I promised to try, he whispered, knowing it was the most honest thing he'd said in years. Outside, the city pulsed with life and possibility, while inside his office, two hearts began the dangerous dance of falling in love at the worst possible moment. 3 days until his wedding, 72 hours until forever. And already, Damon Reed knew that nothing would ever be the same. The penthouse stretched before them like an empty canvas, floor-to-ceiling windows framing the Manhattan skyline in shades of amber and gold as the sun began its descent. Sophia stood in the center of the vast living space, her platinum hair catching the light like spun silk, while Damon watched from the kitchen threshold, still reeling from their encounter hours earlier. She'd changed into jeans and a soft cashmere sweater the color of cream, looking less like the polished professional who'd walked into his office, and more like a woman he could imagine sharing lazy Sunday mornings with. The thought hit him like a physical blow. The bones are beautiful, Sophia murmured, running her fingers along the marble kitchen island. But it feels like a museum. Untouchable. Cold. That's what Victoria wanted, Damon said, stepping closer despite every rational voice in his head screaming at him to maintain distance. She said it should reflect our success. And what do you want it to reflect? The question hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning that had nothing to do with interior design. Damon watched as Sophia moved through the space, her hands trailing over surfaces, her eyes seeing possibilities he'd never imagined. I want it to feel like home, he admitted quietly. I want it to be a place where someone could fall asleep on the couch and not worry about messing up the perfect arrangement. Sophia turned to face him, and the soft understanding in her gray-green eyes nearly undid him. When was the last time you felt at home somewhere? The question sucker-punched him with its simplicity. Damon thought back through years of perfectly appointed spaces, elegant hotels, and manicured environments designed to impress rather than comfort. I honestly can't remember, he said, the admission scraping his throat raw. Then that's what we build here. Not a showcase, but a sanctuary. She moved to the windows, pressing her palm against the glass as she gazed out at the city below. The gesture was unconsciously intimate, and Damon found himself imagining what it would feel like to stand behind her, to wrap his arms around her waist and watch the world together. Tell me about your favorite space, Sophia said without turning around. Anywhere you've ever been, where you felt completely yourself. Damon's mind drifted back to his childhood, to summers spent at his grandmother's cottage in the Hamptons. My grandmother's kitchen, he said slowly. Nothing matched, but everything belonged. Mismatched chairs around a scarred wooden table, herbs growing in mason jars on the windowsill, the smell of fresh bread, and the sound of waves through open windows. That's what we create here, Sophia said, finally turning to face him. That feeling, that sense of belonging. But this is Manhattan. It's a penthouse. It's supposed to be sophisticated. Sophistication without soul is just expensive emptiness. She moved closer, close enough that he could see the gold flecks in her eyes. Let me show you something. Sophia pulled out her phone and swiped through images with graceful fingers. This was a project I did last year in Paris. The client wanted modern luxury, but what she really needed was a space that honored her history while embracing her future. Damon leaned in to see the screen, and their shoulders brushed. The contact sent electricity racing through his veins, making it impossible to focus on anything but her proximity, her scent, the way her breath hitched when he moved closer. It's beautiful, he managed, though he was looking at her face instead of the images. The secret isn't in the expensive pieces, Sophia continued, seemingly unaware of the effect she was having on him. It's in the stories they tell. The worn leather chair that's been reupholstered 3 times because it belonged to her grandfather. The painting she bought with her first paycheck. The blanket her mother knitted. And if someone doesn't have those stories, then we create new ones. She looked up at him, and suddenly they were close enough that he could count her eyelashes, could see the way her pulse fluttered at the base of her throat. Starting now. The air between them crackled with tension so thick he could taste it. Damon's hands itched to touch her face, to thread his fingers through that silk hair, to discover if her lips were as soft as they looked. "Sophia," he said, her name a warning and a plea. "I know," she whispered. "This is crazy. Insane. Impossible. Completely." But neither of them moved away. Instead, they seemed to drift closer, drawn by forces neither could control. Damon's hand lifted of its own accord, hovering just inches from her cheek. "We can't," Sophia breathed, but her eyes said something entirely different. "I know," Damon replied, his thumb brushing the air near her face. "But I can't seem to stop wanting to." The sound of his phone ringing shattered the moment like glass. Victoria's name flashed on the screen and reality crashed back with brutal force. Sophia stepped back as if burned, her cheeks flushed, her breathing unsteady. "Answer it," she said quietly. "She's your fiancée." Damon stared at the phone, at Victoria's perfect smile in the contact photo, and felt like he was looking at a stranger. But duty and obligation were powerful masters, and with a heavy heart, he swiped to answer. "Victoria. Darling, how's the penthouse coming along? Please tell me the designer isn't trying to fill it with bohemian nonsense." Victoria's voice carried clearly in the open space, and Damon watched Sophia flinch at the dismissive tone. "It's progressing," he said carefully. "Good. I just wanted to let you know I might be back earlier than planned. Daddy's handling the vendor payments better than expected. I could be home tomorrow evening instead of Friday." Damon's stomach dropped. "Tomorrow? Is that a problem? I thought you'd be excited to see me. We haven't talked properly in days." "Of course," he said automatically, watching as Sophia gathered her things with jerky, efficient movements. "I'll pick you up from the airport." "Perfect. Oh, and Damon, make sure the designer understands that we want elegant, not emotional. This is our first home as a married couple. It needs to make the right impression." "Right. Of course. I love you, darling. See you tomorrow." The line went dead, and Damon stood holding the phone like it might explode. When he looked up, Sophia was already at the door, her professional mask firmly back in place. "I should go," she said without meeting his eyes. "I'll email you some preliminary concepts tonight." "Sophia, wait." "This was a mistake," she said quietly. "I don't poach other women's men, and I don't break up happy homes. Whatever this is, it ends here." "What if it's not a happy home?" The words escaped before he could stop them, raw and desperate. Sophia paused, her hand on the door handle. "Then you need to figure that out before Saturday. But you need to figure it out without me." "What if I can't?" She turned then, and the pain in her eyes nearly brought him to his knees. "Then you marry her anyway because that's what honorable men do. They keep their promises, even when their hearts are breaking." "And what about your heart?" "My heart," Sophia said with a sad smile, "was never part of the equation. Goodbye, Damon." She left, and the penthouse suddenly felt like the cold, empty museum she'd described earlier. Damon stood alone among the perfect, soulless furniture, listening to the echo of her footsteps fade away and wondering how someone could walk into his life and change everything in less than 24 hours. Outside, the city glittered with a million lights, each one representing someone else's story, someone else's choices. And for the first time in his adult life, Damon Reed had no idea what his own story was supposed to be. All he knew was that 36 hours until his wedding felt like both an eternity and no time at all. Rain hammered against the penthouse windows like bullets, turning Manhattan into a watercolor blur of lights and shadows. Sophia stood on a ladder, hanging the final piece, a vintage mirror that caught the storm's reflection and threw fractured light across the transformed space. 36 hours. That's all they had left before Damon became someone else's husband, and she became nothing more than the designer who'd made their home beautiful for another woman to enjoy. Careful, Damon's voice came from below, steady and warm. He stood at the base of the ladder, his hands poised to catch her if she fell. The gesture was protective, intimate, and completely unnecessary, which made it all the more devastating. "I've been hanging pictures since I was 12, Sophia said, not trusting herself to look down at him. She could feel his presence like heat against her skin, could smell his cologne, something clean and masculine that made her think of midnight confessions and stolen moments. Just because you can take care of yourself doesn't mean you have to. The words hit her like a physical blow. When was the last time someone had wanted to protect her? When was the last time she'd let them? She climbed down slowly, hyper-aware of how his hands hovered near her waist, ready to steady her. When her feet touched the ground, she found herself trapped between the ladder and his body, close enough to see the exhaustion etched around his eyes, the shadow of stubble that made him look rumpled and real. "You didn't sleep," she observed. "Neither did you." It was true. She'd spent the night in her studio, sketching and re-sketching layouts for a space that would never truly be hers, for a man she couldn't have. Her fingers were stained with charcoal, her hair escaped from its ponytail in wisps that framed her face. "We should review the final touches," she said, stepping away from him and the dangerous pull of his proximity. "Victoria will be here in 18 hours. At the mention of his fiancée's name, something flickered in Damon's eyes. Guilt, resignation, something that looked almost like grief. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" "Don't say her name like that, like you're reminding me of my execution date." Sophia turned to face him fully, and the raw pain in his expression made her chest tight. "Isn't that what it is? I thought it was what I wanted. A partnership, security, a life that made sense on paper. And now..." Damon ran his hands through his hair, the careful styling falling apart under his fingers. "Now I know the difference between existing and living. And I'm terrified that Saturday, I'll choose to keep existing because it's easier than fighting for what might make me come alive." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither should cross. Sophia felt herself wavering on the edge of something that could destroy them both. "You could call it off," she whispered. "Could I? Do you know what it would mean? The contracts, the investors, the social fallout. Victoria's family has billions tied up in our merger." "Merger?" Sophia's voice cracked. "Listen to yourself. You're talking about marriage like a business deal." "Because that's what it is," Damon's composure finally shattered. "That's what it's always been. A strategic alliance between compatible parties. No one gets hurt because no one expects more than what's on the table." "And what about love?" "Love?" He laughed bitterly. "Love is what got my parents divorced. Love is what made my father choose passion over responsibility and left my mother broken. Love is a luxury I never thought I could afford. Until a woman walked into my office and showed me what I've been starving for without even knowing I was hungry." The words shattered the last of Sophia's defenses. She moved toward him without conscious thought, drawn by the raw honesty in his voice, the vulnerability he was offering like a gift. "Damon," she breathed, "I know this is selfish. I know I have no right to feel this way about you when I'm promised to someone else. But Sophia, for the first time in my life, I understand why people throw away everything for love. Because being in the same room with you feels more real than anything I've experienced in 32 years. Thunder crashed overhead, and in the flash of lightning that followed, they were illuminated like figures in a painting, two souls reaching for each other across an impossible divide. "I was engaged once," Sophia said suddenly, the words torn from her throat. In Paris, to a man who loved the idea of me more than the reality. He wanted a beautiful accessory, someone who would smile at dinner parties and never challenge his vision of our perfect life. Damon stepped closer, sensing the pain beneath her revelation. I found out 3 days before our wedding that he'd been having an affair with his assistant. When I confronted him, he said it didn't matter because our marriage wasn't about passion. It was about building something lasting and respectable. Jesus, Sophia. That's why I swore I'd never be the other woman. Never be the reason someone's life fell apart, even if that life was built on lies. Tears glittered in her eyes. But I'm standing here, 36 hours before your wedding, and all I can think about is how much I want to kiss you. The confession shattered the last barrier between them. Damon crossed the remaining space in 2 strides, his hands framing her face with desperate tenderness. Then kiss me, he whispered against her lips, because I'm drowning here, and you're the only thing that feels like air. When their lips met, it was like the world caught fire. Every nerve ending in Sophia's body came alive, every carefully constructed wall around her heart crumbling to dust. This wasn't the polite, practiced affection she'd known before. This was raw, desperate, consuming. This was what love songs were written about, what people fought wars over, what made smart people do impossibly stupid things. Damon kissed her like she was oxygen, and he'd been suffocating, his hands tangling in her hair, pulling her closer, as if he could somehow merge their souls through touch alone. She could taste the storm on his lips, could feel the tremor in his hands as they traced the line of her jaw. "This is insane," she gasped against his mouth. "Completely," he agreed, trailing kisses down her throat that made her knees weak. "We have to stop." "I know." But neither of them pulled away. Instead, they held each other in the center of the transformed penthouse, surrounded by the beautiful life they'd created together but could never share. "What are we going to do?" Sophia whispered. Damon pulled back to look at her, his eyes dark with want and anguish. "I don't know. I only know that letting you walk away feels like the biggest mistake I could ever make. And marrying Victoria feels like the second biggest." Outside, the storm raged on, but inside their bubble of stolen time, everything was quiet except the sound of 2 hearts breaking in perfect synchronization. The point of no return wasn't a destination, it was a moment, and they just crossed it without looking back. The sound of a key turning in the lock cut through the peaceful quiet of the penthouse like a blade through silk. Sophia and Damon sprang apart, the bubble of their stolen moment popping with devastating finality. Her lips still tingled from his kiss, her heart still hammered against her ribs, but reality crashed back with the force of a freight train. "She's not supposed to be back until—" Damon started. "Tomorrow," Sophia finished, her voice barely above a whisper. They stood frozen in the center of the living room, guilty as teenagers caught sneaking past curfew, surrounded by the beautiful space they'd created together that now felt like evidence of their crime. The door swung open, and Victoria Ashford entered like a force of nature wrapped in Chanel. Even travel-weary, she was stunning. Ice-blonde hair pulled into a perfect chignon, crystalline blue eyes that missed nothing, red lips that had never spoken a word that wasn't calculated for maximum effect. Her gaze swept the transformed penthouse, cataloging every change before landing on Sophia with laser precision. "Well," Victoria said, her voice honey-sweet with an undertone of steel. "This is cozy." "Victoria." Damon stepped forward, his businessman's mask sliding back into place with practiced ease. "You're early. I thought that you'd have more time to play house with your little decorator." Victoria's smile could have cut glass. "Yes, I imagine you did." Sophia felt the blood drain from her face. How much had Victoria seen? How long had she been watching? "The penthouse looks lovely," Victoria continued, shedding her coat with languid grace. "Very intimate." almost like someone designed it for people who actually love each other. The words hit their mark with surgical precision. Sophia saw Damon flinch, saw the guilt and panic war across his features. "Victoria, it's not what you think," he began. "Isn't it?" Victoria moved closer, her heels clicking against the hardwood like a countdown. "Because what I think is that I left my fiancé to handle the simple task of supervising interior design, and I come home to find him looking at another woman like she hung the moon." "Miss Ashford," Sophia found her voice, stepping forward. "I can explain." "Can you?" Victoria's attention shifted to her with predatory focus. "Please do explain why my wedding planner received a very interesting call from a mutual friend who happened to see you and my fiancé having what looked like a very romantic dinner at Café Laurent last night." Sophia's stomach dropped. They hadn't had dinner, they'd grabbed coffee while discussing fabric samples. But in the wrong light, to the wrong eyes, it could have looked like so much more. "We were working," Sophia said carefully. "Of course you were." Victoria's laugh was like broken crystal. "And I suppose the way he's looking at you right now is also work-related?" Damon stepped between them, his jaw tight. "Victoria, you're being unreasonable. Sophia has done an incredible job with the space." "I'm sure she has." Victoria's eyes glittered with malice. "Tell me, Miss Laurent, do you make it a habit of seducing your clients' fiancés? Or is my Damon special?" "That's enough." Damon's voice carried a warning that made both women look at him. "You don't get to speak to her like that." "Don't I?" Victoria's mask slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "I'm your fiancé, Damon. We're getting married in 30 hours. I think that gives me the right to ask questions when I find you looking like you'd rather be anywhere else with anyone else." The silence that followed was deafening. Sophia watched as Damon struggled with the truth, with duty, with the weight of expectations and contracts and promises made before he'd known what love could feel like. "You're right," he said finally, and Sophia felt her heart shatter. "You are my fiancé, and I owe you honesty." "Damon, don't," Sophia whispered. But he was already speaking. "I have feelings for Sophia," he said, the words falling like stones into still water. "Feelings that have nothing to do with business and everything to do with the fact that she makes me remember who I am underneath all the expectations and obligations." Victoria's composure cracked, revealing genuine hurt beneath the practiced perfection. "How could you do this to me? To us? 3 days before our wedding?" "Because I didn't plan it," Damon said quietly. "I didn't want it. I tried to fight it." "But Victoria, can you honestly say you love me? Or do you love what I represent?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. For a moment, Sophia thought she saw something real in Victoria's eyes. Vulnerability, perhaps even acknowledgement of the truth. Then the moment passed, and Victoria's expression hardened into something cold and calculating. "You want honesty," Victoria said, her voice dropping to a deadly whisper. "Fine, you're right. I don't love you the way she clearly does. But I chose you, Damon. I committed to building a life with you. And more importantly, my father has invested $40 million in your company based on our engagement." Damon went very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you humiliate me by calling off this wedding for some designer you've known for 3 days, my father will pull every penny of his investment. Your company will collapse. Every employee who depends on you will lose their job. Every project you've spent years developing will die." Sophia felt sick. She'd known powerful men used money as a weapon, but she'd never seen it wielded with such surgical precision. "You're blackmailing me," Damon said, his voice hollow. "I'm reminding you of your responsibilities," Victoria corrected. "To me, to our families, to the hundreds of people whose livelihoods depend on your decisions. Is your little infatuation really worth destroying all of that?" Sophia watched Damon's face, saw the exact moment his spirit broke, saw duty and obligation crush the light that had been growing in his eyes since they'd met. "No," he said quietly. "It's not." The words hit Sophia like physical blows. She'd known this moment would come, had tried to prepare herself for it. But nothing could have readied her for the devastating reality of watching the man she loved choose duty over happiness. "Good," Victoria said, satisfaction purring in her voice. "Miss Laurent, I assume your work here is finished?" Sophia looked around the penthouse they'd transformed together, at the beautiful space that would now house a loveless marriage built on manipulation and threats. "Yes, it's finished." "Excellent. Damon will write you a check, and I'm sure you'll have no trouble finding the door." "Victoria," Damon's voice carried a warning. "What? I'm being perfectly civil." "Unless you'd prefer I call security?" Sophia gathered what remained of her dignity and moved toward her portfolio. "That won't be necessary." As she reached the door, she turned back one last time. Damon stood in the center of the beautiful room they'd created, looking like a man attending his own funeral. Their eyes met, and in that moment, she saw everything he couldn't say, the love he felt, the choice he couldn't make, the life they'd never share. "Goodbye, Damon," she whispered. "Sophia." But she was already gone, leaving behind only the echo of her footsteps and the lingering scent of her perfume. In the elevator, surrounded by polished steel and suffocating silence, Sophia finally let herself cry. Upstairs, Damon stood motionless, while Victoria moved around their future home, already mentally rearranging things to her liking. "You'll thank me someday," she said, without looking at him. When the passion fades and you realize that love built on practicality lasts longer than love built on fairy tales. But Damon wasn't listening. He was staring at the mirror Sophia had hung that morning, at the way it caught the light and threw fractured rainbows across the room. Like everything else she'd touched, it was beautiful and broken and perfect, just like his heart. The wedding was supposed to begin in 4 hours, but Damon Reed sat in his study at 6 a.m., staring at a stack of financial documents that had arrived by courier at dawn. Numbers that didn't add up. Contracts that told a different story than the one Victoria had painted the night before. Richard Ashford hadn't invested $40 million in Reed Industries. He'd purchased $40 million in bonds that matured regardless of the wedding. Bonds that, according to the fine print Damon was now reading with laser focus, actually gave Reed Industries more flexibility, not less. Victoria had lied. His phone buzzed with a text from his wedding planner. Final headcount confirmed. "See you at the church at 2 p.m. Today's the day." The exclamation point felt like mockery. Damon pushed back from his desk and walked to the window, watching the city wake up below him. Somewhere out there, Sophia was probably packing, preparing to leave New York, and the memory of 3 impossible days behind. The thought made his chest feel like it was caving in. "Sir?" Sarah appeared in the doorway looking concerned. "The car will be here in an hour to take you to get ready at the hotel. Should I confirm?" "Sarah," Damon said without turning around. "What would you do if you had to choose between keeping your job and keeping your soul?" "Sir?" "Hypothetically. If doing the right thing meant potentially losing everything you'd worked for, but doing the wrong thing meant losing who you are, what would you choose?" Sarah was quiet for a long moment. "I think, sir, that things built on lies don't last anyway. Better to lose everything and keep your integrity than to win everything and lose yourself." Damon finally turned to face her. "Even if other people got hurt in the process? The people who love you would rather see you happy and struggling than miserable and successful. At least that's what my grandmother always said. The people who love you." When was the last time someone had loved Damon Reed the man, instead of Damon Reed the CEO, the catch, the strategic alliance? When was the last time someone had looked at him and seen possibility instead of profit? 3 days ago, in his office, when gray-green eyes had met his and changed everything. "Sarah," he said, decision crystallizing like ice in his veins. "Cancel the car." "Sir?" "Cancel everything. The car, the flowers, the photographer. Call the church and tell them the wedding is off." Sarah's eyes widened. "Mr. Reed, are you sure? Miss Ashford, Miss Ashford will survive. She might even thank me someday. Damon was already moving, energy coursing through him like electricity. I need you to do something else for me. Find out where Sophia Laurent is staying, and Sarah, clear my schedule for the next week. The Henderson Project meeting will have to wait. I have something more important to do. For the first time in months, Damon felt like he could breathe. Sophia's hotel room overlooked Central Park, but she'd kept the curtains drawn since returning the night before. She'd cried until her eyes were raw, then spent the remaining hours staring at the ceiling and trying to convince herself that walking away had been the right choice. Her flight to Paris left at 6 p.m. 12 hours, and she'd be back to her old life. Her safe life. Her life without impossible men who made her believe in fairy tales. A knock at her door made her look up from her half-packed suitcase. Room service, probably. She'd ordered coffee and hadn't touched it. "Just leave it outside," she called. "Sophia." Damon's voice, rough and desperate, filtered through the door. "Please, let me explain." Her heart stopped, then started again, beating so hard she was sure he could hear it through the door. "Go away, Damon. You have a wedding to get to." "No, I don't." The words were so quiet, she thought she'd imagined them. She moved to the door, pressing her palm against the wood as if she could feel him on the other side. "What did you say?" "I said I don't have a wedding to get to. I called it off." Sophia's knees went weak. She fumbled with the locks, her hands shaking as she opened the door to find Damon standing in the hallway, still in his clothes from the night before, his hair disheveled, his eyes red-rimmed but blazing with determination. "You called it off?" she whispered. Victoria lied about the investment, about the consequences, about everything. Damon stepped closer, hope and fear warring in his expression. "Richard Ashford's money was never contingent on the marriage. She manipulated us both. But your company will survive. My employees will keep their jobs. The only thing that won't survive is a marriage built on lies and blackmail." Damon reached for her hands, his touch warm and real, and everything she'd thought she'd lost forever. "Sophia, I was a coward. I let fear make my decisions instead of love. I let her convince me that duty mattered more than happiness." "Damon!" "I love you," he said, the words rushing out like he'd been holding them back forever. "I love the way you see beauty in broken things. I love how you make me want to be better than I am. I love that you walked into my perfectly ordered life and turned it upside down in the most beautiful way possible." Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks. "It's not that simple." "It is that simple," Damon insisted. "Love is simple. It's everything else that's complicated, and I'm done letting complicated win. What about Victoria? The wedding guests, the social fallout? Victoria will find someone else to manipulate. The guests will go home with a good story. And the social fallout." Damon cupped her face in his hands, his thumbs brushing away her tears. "I'd rather be notorious for choosing love than respected for choosing convention." "Are you sure?" Sophia searched his face, looking for any trace of doubt. "Because I can't go through losing you again. I won't survive it twice." "I'm sure," Damon said, his voice steady and certain. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life. Sophia Laurent, you are my home. You are my future. You are the reason I want to wake up every morning and the last thing I want to see every night." "That sounds suspiciously like a proposal, Mr. Reed." "Maybe it is," Damon smiled, the first real smile she'd seen from him since they'd met. "But I'm doing this right. No pressure, no ultimatums, no deadline. Just a man asking the woman he loves if she'd be willing to build something beautiful together." Sophia felt the last of her defenses crumble. "What did you have in mind?" "Paris. Tonight. Your flight. I want to be on it with you. I want to see your world, meet your friends, understand all the pieces of you I haven't discovered yet." Damon's eyes shone with possibility. "I want to court you properly, Sophia. Take you to dinner without hiding. Hold your hand in public. Show you off to anyone who'll listen. And your business? Has competent people who can handle things for a week or two while I remember how to live instead of just existing. Sophia felt herself melting, felt the future reshaping itself around this impossible, wonderful man who'd just blown up his entire life for the chance to build a new one with her. There's something you should know about me, she said, trying to maintain some semblance of practicality. What's that? I'm not easy to love. I'm stubborn and independent, and I have trust issues from here to the Eiffel Tower. And there's something you should know about me, Damon replied, pulling her closer. I'm not going anywhere. Stubborn sounds interesting. Independent is attractive. And as for trust issues, I've got time to prove myself worthy of yours. How much time? Forever, if you'll let me. When Sophia kissed him this time, it wasn't desperate or stolen or shadowed by guilt. It was a promise, a beginning, a yes to all the questions he hadn't asked yet. Paris sounds perfect, she whispered against his lips. Really? Really? But Damon? Yeah? Next time you want to dramatically chase after me, maybe shower first. You look like you've been awake for 3 days. Damon's laughter filled the hallway, bright and free and full of joy. Next time I won't let you get far enough away to chase. Promise? Promise. 6 months later, the morning light streaming through the tall windows of Sophia's Parisian studio painted everything in shades of gold and possibility. Damon stood at the easel, his sleeves rolled up, a streak of cerulean blue across his cheek, as he attempted to capture the way shadows danced across the weathered brick walls. You're overthinking it, Sophia said from behind him, her arms sliding around his waist, her chin resting on his shoulder. Art isn't about perfection. It's about feeling. Easy for you to say, Damon replied, leaning back into her warmth. You actually have talent. I have practice. There's a difference. Sophia pressed a kiss to the spot where his neck met his shoulder, and even after 6 months, the simple touch still sent electricity racing through his veins. Besides, talent is overrated. Passion is what matters. Damon turned in her arms, studying her face in the golden morning light. Her hair was longer now, falling in loose waves past her shoulders, and there was a contentment in her gray-green eyes that hadn't been there when they'd first met. Paris had been good to them, had given them space to discover each other without the weight of expectations or the shadow of other people's agendas. Speaking of passion, he murmured, brushing a strand of hair from her face, I have something for you. If it's coffee, I love you forever. If it's croissants, I might actually marry you. Damon's heart skipped at the casual mention of marriage. They'd talked around it, danced near it, but neither had been ready to make that leap. Not after everything they'd been through. Better than coffee, he said, reaching into his pocket, though possibly not as practical as croissants. Sophia's eyes widened as he pulled out a small velvet box, her hands flying to cover her mouth. Damon, before you panic, he said quickly, this isn't what you think it is. I mean, it is, but it isn't. Let me explain before you start hyperventilating. I'm not hyperventilating, Sophia said, though her breathing had definitely quickened. Sophia Laurent, Damon said, dropping to one knee right there in her paint-splattered studio, with the morning sun creating a halo around them both. 6 months ago, you walked into my life and turned everything upside down in the most beautiful way possible. Damon, you taught me the difference between existing and living. You showed me that home isn't a place, it's a person. You made me brave enough to choose love over fear, happiness over security, you over everything else in the world. Tears were streaming down Sophia's face now, and Damon felt his own eyes burning with emotion. I know we said we'd take this slow. I know we agreed no pressure, no timeline, no rushing into anything. But Sophia, I wake up every morning more in love with you than I was the day before, and I can't imagine a future that doesn't have you in it. He opened the box to reveal not a traditional engagement ring, but a stunning vintage piece. An Art Deco design with a central diamond surrounded by sapphires that caught the light like captured starlight. This isn't a demand or an ultimatum, Damon continued. This is a promise. A promise that I will love you fiercely and faithfully for as long as you'll let me. A promise that I will support your dreams even when they're bigger than mine. A promise that I will never, ever make you choose between love and independence. What are you asking me? Sophia whispered. I'm asking if you'd like to be officially, legally, permanently stuck with me. I'm asking if you'd like to build something beautiful together. Not just a home, but a life, a family, a future that belongs to us and no one else. Sophia was crying too hard to speak, so she just nodded, holding out her trembling left hand. When Damon slipped the ring onto her finger, it fit perfectly, like it had been waiting for her all along. Is that a yes? He asked, standing and pulling her into his arms. That's a yes to everything, Sophia sobbed against his chest. Yes to marriage. Yes to building something beautiful. Yes to being stuck with you forever. When he kissed her, it tasted like tears and laughter, and the promise of all their tomorrows. 1 year later, the small church in Provence was perfect, intimate and ancient, with ivy climbing the stone walls and wildflowers scattered along the aisle. Sophia walked toward Damon with no one to give her away, because she belonged to herself, had always belonged to herself, and was choosing to share that self with the man who taught her that love didn't have to mean losing yourself. Damon waited at the altar in a simple gray suit, his eyes bright with unshed tears as he watched her approach. No ornate ceremony, no society photographers, no guest list calculated for maximum political impact. Just 50 people who loved them, witnessing two hearts choosing each other freely and completely. You look, Damon said when she reached him, absolutely radiant. You clean up pretty well yourself, Sophia replied, straightening his tie with fingers that shook only slightly. The ceremony was simple and perfect. They'd written their own vows, promises that spoke of partnership and respect, and the kind of love that grows stronger through challenge rather than weaker. I promise to love you not in spite of your stubbornness, but because of it, Damon said, his voice carrying clearly through the small church. I promise to support your independence because it's part of what makes you extraordinary. I promise to build a life with you that honors both of our dreams. I promise to trust you with my heart even when it scares me, Sophia replied, her own voice steady despite the tears on her cheeks. I promise to challenge you when you need it and support you always. I promise to choose you every day, not because I have to, but because I want to. When the priest pronounced them husband and wife, their kiss was soft and reverent and full of the quiet joy of two people who'd found their home in each other. The reception was held in the garden of the small inn where they'd spent the week before the wedding, string lights twinkling overhead as their guests danced and laughed and celebrated love triumphant. Any regrets? Sophia asked as they swayed together during their first dance as husband and wife. Only one, Damon said, spinning her gently. What's that? That it took me 32 years to find you. Better late than never, Sophia smiled, then grew more serious. Have you heard anything about Victoria? Damon's expression darkened slightly. Richard finally figured out what kind of person she really was. Cut her off financially when he found out she'd been embezzling from his foundation. Last I heard, she was working as a hostess at some restaurant in Miami. Do you feel bad for her? Damon considered the question. I feel bad for who she could have been if she'd chosen differently. But I can't regret anything that led me to you. As if summoned by the mention of their past, Damon's phone buzzed with a text. He ignored it until Sophia gestured for him to check it. The message was from Sarah. Thought you should know. Victoria showed up at the office today asking to see you. Security escorted her out, but she seemed unwell. Just wanted you to be aware. Damon showed Sophia the message, and she read it with a frown. Should we be worried? She asked. No, Damon said firmly, deleting the message and putting his phone away. Victoria is part of our past. Tonight is about our future. He was right. As they danced under the stars, surrounded by the people who loved them, Sophia felt nothing but gratitude for the winding path that had led them here. The pain, the separation, the impossible choices, all of it had been necessary to bring them to this moment of perfect clarity. "I love you, husband," she whispered against his ear. "I love you, wife," he replied, the words still new enough to make them both smile. Later, as their guests began to drift away and the staff cleared the remnants of the celebration, Damon and Sophia stood hand in hand on the terrace overlooking the lavender fields that stretched toward the horizon. "So what now?" Sophia asked. "What does happily ever after look like for us?" "I don't know," Damon admitted. "But I know it involves that studio you're opening in New York. And the sustainable development project I'm starting. And maybe someday a little house with a garden where our children can play." "Children?" Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Eventually, if you want them, no pressure." "I want them," Sophia said softly. "I want everything with you. Even the boring parts? The grocery shopping and bill paying and arguing about whose turn it is to take out the trash? Especially those parts," Sophia laughed. "Those are the parts that make it real." As they stood there planning their beautifully ordinary future, neither of them noticed the figure watching from the shadows at the edge of the property. Victoria Ashford stood among the lavender, her face twisted with rage and envy, her manicured hands clenched into fists. But her presence couldn't touch them. Whatever darkness she carried, whatever revenge she might be plotting, it belonged to the past. Damon and Sophia had chosen light, chosen love, chosen each other. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Their hearts, finally and forever, were perfectly aligned. The end.